No one was late because lateness had no shape. Time moved without numbers. Nights arrived without warning. And entire cities continued functioning calmly without asking what hour anything was. Before you drift any deeper, if this quiet helps you feel safe tonight, you're welcome to stay with us. Subscribing softly keeps this place gentle and lets these nights continue. Now, rest. In the year 900, daily life in Rome, Baghdad, and Alexandria unfolded without clocks and, remarkably, without urgency. There were no hands circling a face, no ticking, insisting that something should already have happened. Time existed, of course, but it existed as atmosphere rather than instruction. People sensed it the way they sensed temperature or fatigue. It was present everywhere and rarely discussed. Morning did not begin at a fixed point. It arrived gradually, leaking into rooms as light found familiar cracks in shutters and stone. Bodies woke when sleep released them, not when a signal demanded compliance. In Rome, bells rang, but they did not enforce. They reminded. A bell suggested that something usually happened now, not that it must begin immediately. Bakers did not look at the sky in panic. They felt the dough. When it behaved correctly, the oven was ready. When the bread was done, the day had begun. Precision was unnecessary. Consistency was enough. Baghdad moved according to sequence rather than schedule. One action followed another in a pattern learned through repetition. Lamps were lit when shadows became inconvenient. Shops thinned when conversation slowed. Study continued until eyes refused cooperation. The city did not divide itself into hours. It divided itself into states, working, resting, waiting, moving, stopping. Each state dissolved naturally into the next, without argument. Alexandria listened to the sea. Time there carried salt and wind. Sailors did not depart at announced moments. They left when the harbor felt permissive. Fishermen understood night by smell and sound, by the way water accepted nets, by how air cooled skin. Sleep followed labor, not instruction. The city did not rush because rushing did not improve the tide. Without clocks, habit became the primary technology. People knew when to eat because hunger arrived reliably. They knew when to rest because fatigue was honest. Nightfall did not require announcement. Darkness dimmed things naturally, and activity lowered its voice in response. Streets grew quieter, not because anyone ordered them to, but because there was less reason to speak loudly. The absence of measurement did not produce confusion. It produced agreement. Sound played a role, but not a tyrannical one. Bells in Rome and calls across Baghdad did not carve time into sharp units. They softened it. They created pauses that felt legitimate. When a bell rang, it was acceptable to stop. When it ended, no one sprinted forward. The sound itself carried permission to slow down, and that permission mattered more than accuracy ever could. Time unmeasured gained texture. It felt thicker in heat, thinner at night. It stretched during waiting and compressed during work. People described it with words like soon, later, before dark, after rest. These expressions were not vague. They were precise enough for lives that did not require optimization. No one counted wasted minutes because there was no standard against which to accuse them. There is a quiet irony here. Modern imagination assumes that without strict timekeeping, societies collapse into disorder. Yet these cities endured precisely because they were not pressed forward minute by minute. Urgency was reserved for genuine danger, not daily routine. When everything is urgent, nothing truly is. By refusing to quantify every moment, life retained its elasticity. No one in 900 complained about running out of time. Time was not something to be spent. It was something that passed alongside you. Night did not judge productivity. It cooled stone, softened voices, and allowed the city to continue without supervision. Work completed itself when it was finished. Rest arrived when it was needed. Nothing dramatic occurred, and that was the achievement. These cities functioned not because they mastered time, but because they stopped trying to command it. They lived inside it instead. And in doing so, they discovered that life does not require constant measurement to persist. It only requires rhythm, familiarity, and the quiet confidence that tomorrow will arrive, whether counted or not. Sound moved through the city long before anyone decided what it meant. It arrived without precision, softened by walls, redirected by corners, weakened by distance, strengthened by familiarity. In a world without clocks, sound did not replace time, it accompanied it. Bells rang not to divide the day into clean pieces, but to acknowledge that the day had shifted its weight slightly, and the people might want to notice. In Rome, bells did not insist on accuracy. They were not interested in being obeyed immediately. Their authority came from repetition rather than force. A bell sounded because it always had, and because everyone understood roughly what followed it. The sound did not mean now. It meant around this time in the way that made sense to you. Some paused. Some continued what they were doing and stopped later. Some barely registered it at all. The city accepted all three responses without complaint. The bell's path was unreliable, and that unreliability was essential. Sound curved around stone, slipped into courtyards, faded entirely in some streets, while echoing clearly in others. No two listeners received the same message. Time, therefore, arrived differently for everyone. This was not disorder. It was flexibility. The bell did not synchronize behavior. It framed it loosely, giving the city a shared sense of direction without demanding uniform speed. Church bells were less about control than about permission. They marked moments when stopping was acceptable, even encouraged. They reminded people that work did not own the entire day. Ironically, this made work easier to continue later. When rest is allowed, labor becomes sustainable. Rome did not run efficiently, it ran tolerably, and tolerance proved to be a far more durable system than discipline. In Baghdad, sound organized the city without ever tightening its grip. Calls traveled across neighborhoods in layers, passing through fabric, wood, dust, and air. The sound did not arrive all at once. It arrived gradually, thinning as it went, losing clarity, gaining softness. People responded at different moments, and that difference was expected. Coordination existed without simultaneity. The city functioned because it did not require everyone to act at the same second. This looseness created a peculiar calm. No one was surprised by delay. Delay was part of the system. When timing is approximate, no one feels accused. There was no moment at which one could say definitively that something had gone wrong simply because it happened later than expected. Expected, after all, was a wide range. Sound in Baghdad did not divide the day into sharp edges. It rounded it. It created gentle thresholds rather than hard boundaries. One activity bled into the next. Study ended when eyes grew tired, not when a signal demanded cessation. Lamps were lit when shadows interfered with reading, not when an hour arrived. Shops thinned gradually. conversation slowing before commerce did. Closing was not an event. It was a consensus reached without discussion. In Alexandria, sound belonged as much to the environment as to people. The harbor spoke constantly. Water touched stone. Wood shifted against wood. Ropes tightened and relaxed. These sounds did not announce time, they described conditions. The night was deeper now. The air had cooled enough. The tide was thinking about turning. Sailors did not ask what time it was. They listened for whether the harbor felt cooperative. Here, sound did not discipline behavior. It informed judgment. A sailor waited not because he was told to, but because the water suggested patience. A merchant opened when footsteps began to sound familiar, not because a bell had finished ringing. Time was sensed rather than measured, and that sensing required attention rather than obedience. Across all three cities, bells and calls shared a crucial quality. They did not accuse, they did not imply failure, they did not suggest that something should already have happened. Modern timekeeping motivates through threat. You are late, you are behind, you have wasted something. Medieval sound carried no such implication. It simply announced presence. The city is still here. The rhythm continues. You have not missed your place in it. This difference shaped behavior profoundly. When time does not judge, people do not rush to defend themselves against it. Movement becomes calmer, waiting becomes tolerable, anxiety loses one of its main sources. The night does not feel like a narrowing window, but like a broad space in which activity can settle naturally. Even sleep followed this logic. People did not go to bed because a bell told them to. They went when houses quieted, when lamps became expensive to justify, when conversation thinned into silence. Darkness did not require enforcement. It lowered voices on its own. Bells and calls did not send people to sleep. Fatigue did. Sound simply confirmed that others were also slowing down. Time carried by sound gained texture rather than structure. It felt heavier in heat, thinner in cool air. It stretched during waiting and compressed during work. People spoke of it in relational terms. Before rest, after the bell, while the harbor is calm. These expressions were not vague. They were precise enough for lives that did not require optimization. There is something faintly ironic in how modern imagination fears this kind of looseness. Without strict schedules, we assume everything would fall apart. In the year 900, the opposite was true. Because time was not enforced externally, people paid closer attention internally. They listened more carefully. They watched light and shadow. They noticed their own limits. The environment participated in scheduling, and people trusted it. Bells did not exist to hurry anyone. They existed to reassure. Reassurance is a subtle form of order. It tells people that nothing has drifted too far, that the pattern still holds, that tomorrow will arrive, whether or not today, was perfectly managed. This removed the need to monitor progress constantly. There was no progress bar to check. Life unfolded at the speed it required. Importantly, these systems demanded very little authority. No one needed to enforce compliance because expectations were modest. You were not expected to be exact. You were expected to be present eventually. That expectation was easy to meet. And because it was easy, it was almost always fulfilled. Sound created community without coercion. Everyone heard something, even if they heard it differently. That shared but uneven experience bound people together loosely, without forcing alignment. The city breathed as a collection of individuals, rather than as a machine. When bells rang, they did not start events. They acknowledged transitions already underway. They recognized that time had shifted, not that it had arrived. This recognition mattered. It allowed people to adjust without panic. Nothing needed to be caught up. Nothing had been lost. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is how little urgency these cities required to survive. They did not depend on speed. They depended on continuity. Bells rang, calls carried, water moved. People responded when ready, and the city endured, not because it moved fast, but because it moved together, loosely, patiently, and without proof. Time did not need to be counted to be shared. It only needed to be heard, felt, and trusted. Night did not begin with an announcement. It arrived gradually, slipping into rooms, through cracks in shutters, and settling onto stone that had spent the day holding heat. No one waited for a signal to stop. They slowed because there was less reason to continue at full volume. Sleep did not require permission. It required only that the day loosen its grip. In the year 900, people in Rome, Baghdad, and Alexandria did not go to bed at a fixed hour. They went when the house changed its mood, when conversation thinned, when light became expensive, when the body made a reasonable case for stopping. Sleep followed habit, not instruction. In Rome, evenings folded inward. The street did not suddenly empty. It softened. Footsteps spaced themselves farther apart. Voices lowered without being asked. Lamps appeared one by one, not in unison, each household deciding independently when darkness had become inconvenient. No one felt compelled to match their neighbors. Uniformity was unnecessary. What mattered was that the city as a whole began to quiet, and that quiet spread naturally. Houses learned their own rhythms. Some families slept earlier. Others lingered longer, finishing food, telling stories, mending small things that daylight had made awkward. Children drifted off first, not because it was time, but because their bodies surrendered sooner. Adults followed when resistance became tiring rather than productive. No one stared at anything glowing, wondering if they were allowed to rest yet. Rest was not earned. It was assumed. In Baghdad, night reorganized life rather than ending it. Heat receded slowly, and with it the urgency of movement. Inner rooms cooled, courtyards breathed. People adjusted their posture, sitting lower, moving less, speaking more carefully. Sleep did not arrive as collapse. It arrived as agreement. The day had done enough. Tomorrow could wait. Many slept in stages. A first rest came early, followed by waking, quiet activity, reflection, or conversation, then another return to sleep. This pattern was not scheduled. It was discovered. Bodies found what worked and repeated it. No one felt obligated to remain unconscious for a prescribed length of time. Waking in the night was not failure. It was part of the rhythm. In Alexandria, sleep negotiated constantly with environment. Sea air cooled rooms unevenly. Some spaces became comfortable earlier than others. People moved accordingly. Mats shifted. Windows adjusted. Sleep followed the best available conditions, not an abstract rule. A fisherman rested when muscles released their tension. A merchant slept when accounts no longer held interest. The city did not demand simultaneous silence. It accepted staggered rest. Without clocks, no one accused themselves of sleeping too much or too little. There was no target. Fatigue was personal, not comparative. One person slept deeply, another lightly. Both were normal. The body was trusted to know what it required. This trust reduced anxiety. When sleep is not measured, it does not become a performance. Night sound supported this trust. There was never complete silence, a distant footstep, water moving somewhere, the soft confirmation that other people still existed beyond the wall. These sounds reassured rather than disturbed. They told the sleeper that vigilance was shared, that nothing required immediate response. One did not need to stay awake just in case. Importantly, sleep was not isolated from the rest of life. It was continuous with it. People slept near tools, near food, near the evidence of daily work. There was no separate realm for rest, no bedroom optimized for unconsciousness. Sleep happened where life had already been happening. This reduced the transition. One did not travel far to rest. One simply stopped. There is a quiet irony here. Modern culture treats sleep as something fragile, requiring protection from noise, light, interruption, and inconsistency. In 900, sleep survived because it was integrated, not protected. It did not need ideal conditions. It needed familiar ones. Habit made imperfection tolerable. Because sleep was not pinned to a clock, waking was also flexible. People rose when light made work practical, not when a signal demanded compliance. Morning arrived differently for everyone. Some woke early, some later. The city did not judge. Activity ramped up gradually as it had slowed. There was no sharp edge between sleeping and waking. The day eased itself open. This flexibility allowed sleep to do its work properly. It was not shortened to meet obligation, nor extended out of guilt. It ended when the body felt ready. Over time, this created stability. People were rarely exhausted in the modern sense. Tired, yes, but not deprived. Rest was woven into life rather than negotiated against it. Dreams were not interrupted by alarms. When waking occurred, it happened from within, not from intrusion. This changed the quality of consciousness. Mornings were quieter internally. Thought returned slowly. There was no immediate demand to perform. The first moments of the day belonged to the self, not to a schedule. There is something almost subversive in this arrangement. A society that does not measure sleep cannot easily extract more labor by shrinking it. Rest becomes a given rather than a variable. Productivity has limits, and those limits are respected not through policy, but through habit. People stop because they always have. Even those who kept watch at night did not experience sleep as deprivation. Guards rested in turns. Watchfulness rotated. No one was expected to remain alert indefinitely. Fatigue was recognized as a risk, not a virtue. Staying awake beyond capacity was not admired. It was avoided. Over generations, these patterns settled into culture. Children learned when to sleep not by being told the hour, but by watching the house. They absorbed rhythm before they absorbed language. Sleep was not taught. It was inherited. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of all this is how unremarkable it was. No one thought of their sleep habits as a system. It was simply how things were done. There were no experts, no advice, no debates about optimal rest. Life did not require optimization. It required continuity. Night after night, this continuity held. People slept, they woke, they worked, they rested again. The absence of clocks did not create chaos. It created permission. Permission to stop when stopping made sense, permission to wake when waking felt right, permission to trust the body. And so the city slept. Not all at once, not in perfect silence, but well enough. Lamps dimmed, voices faded. Stone released its heat slowly. Somewhere, someone was still awake, but not for long. There was no urgency to resist sleep. Tomorrow would come regardless. Sleep did not need to be scheduled to be sufficient. It only needed to be allowed. And in the year 900, it was. Night did not end the day. It rearranged it. When light withdrew, the city did not close its eyes. It shifted posture. Tasks that had waited quietly through heat and noise stepped forward, not as exceptions, but as expected participants in a different version of the same routine. Darkness was not an interruption. It was a condition. In the year 900, work at night in Rome, Baghdad, and Alexandria did not feel dramatic. There were no torches raised to announce importance, no urgency added for effect. Night work existed because it made sense there. Heat loosened, crowds thinned, sound traveled differently. The city offered cooperation it withheld during the day. In Rome, stone had absorbed warmth since morning. By evening, it released that heat slowly, evenly, without effort. Courtyards cooled first. Inner rooms followed. This was the moment when maintenance became possible. Repairs that required patience rather than strength moved forward. Mending, sorting, cleaning. Tasks that benefited from quiet took their turn. The city did not celebrate these activities. It depended on them. Night work favored repetition over innovation. It was not the time to begin something new. It was the time to continue something already understood. People swept because they always had. They checked doors because they always would. They prepared for tomorrow by making sure today did not leave loose ends behind. This kind of labor rarely leaves records. It leaves conditions. In Baghdad, night expanded usable space. Daytime heat pressed inward, limiting movement. At night, the city breathed. Courtyards became comfortable. Roofs accepted bodies. Passageways cooled enough to invite walking without effort. Work adjusted accordingly. Scholars read longer. Copyists worked steadily. Conversations that required patience found their proper hour. Light at night was not abundant. It was selective. Lamps were placed where they mattered, not everywhere at once. This created islands of activity surrounded by darkness. Movement between these islands was deliberate. One did not rush through shadow. One carried light carefully, aware of its cost. Oil mattered. Wick length mattered. Efficiency existed, but it was quiet. Markets did not vanish at sunset. They softened. Certain trades preferred night. Bakers worked when ovens could be managed without competing with heat. Water carriers moved when bodies lost less moisture. Goods that required careful handling traveled more safely through thinner crowds. Night was not empty. It was specialized. In Alexandria, the harbor never truly slept. Water did not recognize human schedules. Tides moved when they moved. Sailors adjusted. Some tasks waited for darkness because darkness improved conditions. Wind calmed, air cooled. The sea listened differently. Nets were mended. Hulls checked. Cargo rearranged. These activities did not compete with daylight labor. They complemented it. Night work did not seek recognition. It sought completion. There was no audience. There was no reward beyond knowing that the task would not cause trouble tomorrow. This lack of spectacle changed motivation. People worked because the work needed doing, not because it would be seen. The city relied on this invisibility. Sound at night was precise. A dropped object was noticed. A raised voice carried farther than intended. This discouraged excess. Work adapted. Movements became economical. Tools were handled carefully. Conversation shortened. Night trained restraint, without instruction. Importantly, night labor did not belong to a separate class. It rotated. The same people who worked by day often worked by night, just differently. No one lived entirely outside the cycle. This prevented resentment. Night was not punishment. It was opportunity. Opportunity to do certain things well. Time behaved differently in darkness. Without visual cues, attention narrowed. People focused on immediate surroundings. This made work slower but steadier. Errors decreased. Distraction thinned. The absence of urgency improved quality. A task completed at night tended to last longer. There's a quiet irony here. Modern systems treat night as either downtime or crisis. In 900, night was neither. It was a second shift without hostility. The city did not fight darkness, it collaborated with it. Security at night did not rely on constant vigilance. It relied on presence. Someone was always awake, somewhere. Not to guard everything, but to notice enough. Watchfulness rotated naturally. No one was expected to remain alert beyond capacity. Fatigue was recognized as dangerous. Rest followed effort. Effort followed rest. The boundary between work and rest at night was soft. Someone might stop working and sit quietly without declaring a break. Another might lie down briefly and return later. There was no schedule to violate. The city accepted these pauses as part of functioning. Productivity did not require continuous motion. It required continuity over time. Light itself shaped labor. Where a lamp stood, work gathered. When oil ran low, work concluded. Darkness enforced limits gently. No one argued with it. You stopped not because you were told to, but because the environment made continuation unreasonable. This created a subtle respect for materials. Oil was not wasted. Wicks were trimmed carefully. Fire was contained. Night encouraged care because consequences were closer. A mistake carried farther. This sharpened attention without pressure. Night work also carried a social quality. People spoke more softly, but often more honestly. The absence of crowds reduced performance. Conversations could unfold without interruption. Decisions were made slowly, with fewer witnesses, and therefore with less need to impress. Across Rome, Baghdad, and Alexandria, night was understood as a space with rules different from day, but no less legitimate. It was not borrowed time. It was its own environment. People adjusted posture, pace, and expectation accordingly. There were no clocks to announce when night work should end. It ended when conditions changed, when light returned, when bodies tired, when the task reached a natural stopping point. This flexibility prevented burnout. Work did not bleed endlessly into rest. It concluded because something else needed to begin. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is how functional this arrangement was. Without strict oversight, without schedules, without supervision, essential labor happened reliably. The city remained clean enough, supplied enough, prepared enough, not optimized, enough. Night did not demand heroics. It rewarded moderation. Those who tried to force productivity beyond reasonable limits found little support. Darkness does not applaud effort. It absorbs it quietly. By morning, much had been accomplished without announcement. Streets were clearer, tools were where they needed to be, goods had moved, information had been copied. None of this required daylight to be meaningful. It required only that someone be willing to work without being seen. And so the city continued. Day prepared night, night prepared day. Neither dominated. Each made space for the other. Work did not end when light faded. It changed form. Night was not the absence of activity. It was activity without display. And in that restraint, the city found a rhythm strong enough to endure. Markets did not end with a signal. They thinned. Stalls did not vanish all at once. They softened their presence, one table at a time, one voice at a time, as if the city itself were gently exhaling. Trade did not stop because time demanded it. It stopped because continuation no longer made sense. In the year 900, markets in Rome, Baghdad, and Alexandria operated without closing hours. There were no doors to lock on time itself. Commerce followed presence. When people drifted away, trade followed them. When attention faded, exchange lost urgency. No announcement was required. In Rome, the market was less a place than a condition. It appeared where people gathered and dissolved when they did not. Vendors learned to read this movement with precision that did not require numbers. A seller noticed when questions slowed, when fingers stopped touching goods, when conversation shifted away from price and toward tomorrow. That was the signal. Not a bell, not a command, just the recognition that the day had given what it would give. Stalls closed unevenly. One remained open longer because someone was still bargaining seriously. Another packed early because the goods were gone or the seller was tired. No one accused either of doing it wrong. The market did not require symmetry. It required participation, and participation came in waves. In Baghdad, markets breathed with the city. Heat determined flow as much as demand. When the sun pressed down, movement narrowed. When evening arrived, trade widened again, but only briefly. Night did not belong to buying and selling indefinitely. It belonged to balance. Sellers stayed until exchange felt complete. Buyers left when satisfaction outweighed curiosity. The absence of strict hours removed a particular kind of tension. No one rushed to make a final purchase before closing. There was no final call. If something was missed, it would likely be available tomorrow. This reduced impulsive buying. Trade became steadier, more deliberate. Decisions were made with less pressure, and regret had fewer opportunities to appear. Alexandria's markets listened to the harbor. Goods arrived when ships arrived. They moved when space allowed. Closing followed exhaustion rather than policy. A fish seller knew when freshness had reached its limit. A spice merchant sensed when air no longer favored display. Night changed the chemistry of trade, and merchants respected that without debate. Light played a central role. As lamps appeared, they did not extend the market indefinitely. They selected portions of it. A small circle of trade remained active, while the rest dissolved into shadow. This created pockets of commerce rather than a continuous field. Buyers moved deliberately between them. Sellers accepted that not all goods deserved light at night. Markets closed by agreement that was never spoken aloud, agreement that the day had been sufficient, agreement that further exchange would cost more than it yielded, agreement that rest was now more valuable than profit. This agreement was learned, not enforced. There is something quietly humorous in how this system contradicts modern assumptions. Without fixed hours, one might expect endless selling, relentless pursuit of advantage. Instead, markets rested. Sellers stopped not because they were forced to, but because they wanted to remain capable tomorrow. Long-term presence mattered more than short-term gain. This approach created trust. Buyers trusted that sellers would return. Sellers trusted that buyers would not disappear permanently if something was delayed. The market existed as a relationship rather than a transaction. Relationships tolerate pauses. Night altered behavior subtly. Voices lowered, gestures slowed, bargaining softened. Aggressive tactics lost effectiveness when attention waned. Sellers adjusted tone rather than insisting. Buyers sensed when negotiation had reached its natural end. Both sides recognized diminishing returns. Importantly, closing was never dramatic. There were no final announcements, no sudden silence. The market simply became something else, a space to walk through rather than stop within. Goods covered, tables cleared, paths widened. Commerce withdrew, without resentment. This withdrawal mattered. It protected the market from exhaustion. A market that never rests becomes desperate. One that rests regularly remains confident. Confidence attracts participation more reliably than availability. Children observed this rhythm early. They learned that selling did not mean staying until collapse. They saw adults choose to stop. This taught restraint without lecture. Commerce was not endless appetite. It was measured engagement. Markets also respected night work elsewhere. Bakers needed space. Water carriers needed passage. The market did not compete aggressively with these functions. It yielded. Yielding was part of its survival strategy. In all three cities, the market was not governed by time but by density. When density dropped below usefulness, exchange ended. This metric was intuitive. Anyone could sense it. No one needed to calculate it. This created a different relationship to waiting. Buyers who arrived late did not complain. They adapted. Perhaps tomorrow, perhaps elsewhere. Waiting did not feel like failure because nothing had promised immediate fulfillment. Desire was moderated by expectation. There is a subtle dignity in this moderation. It acknowledges that not every want must be satisfied instantly. The market did not exist to erase discomfort completely. It existed to facilitate reasonable exchange. Night amplified this dignity. In low light, goods lost some of their persuasive power. Shine dulled, color softened. This reduced impulse. Trade became quieter, more thoughtful. Sellers accepted fewer transactions with less drama. Closing by agreement also reduced conflict. When there is no deadline, there is less blame. No one accuses a seller of shutting early. No one accuses a buyer of arriving late. The market did not create enemies. It created neighbors. By morning, the market would return. Not identical, but familiar. Goods might differ. People might change. The rhythm remained. This reliability mattered more than precision. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is how sustainable this was. Without regulation, without clocks, without enforcement, markets functioned smoothly for generations. They avoided burnout not through policy, but through habit. Trade did not consume the night, it respected it. And in doing so, it preserved itself. Markets that close by agreement do not need supervision. They need only participants who understand that continuation is not always improvement. In the year 900, this understanding was common, quiet, and effective. And so the stalls folded, lamps dimmed, voices drifted away. The market became a memory of activity rather than an insistence on more. Tomorrow would be enough. Light did not simply illuminate the city, it shaped it. Where light settled, activity gathered. Where it withdrew, motion softened. In the year 900, the day did not begin or end at a number. It unfolded according to how light moved across stone, water, and skin, and how shadow accepted what light left behind. In Rome, morning revealed itself gradually. Sunlight reached upper walls first, catching edges and corners before touching the street. The ground remained cool while facades warmed. People noticed this difference instinctively. Work that benefited from light but not heat began early. Tasks that required strength waited until bodies had adjusted. The city did not rush to greet the sun. It allowed light to make its way inward at its own pace. Shadows mattered as much as brightness. Narrow streets preserved them longer. Courtyards created controlled pools of light that shifted slowly. Movement followed these gradients. People walked where shade offered comfort, paused where light allowed clarity, and avoided places where glare made judgment difficult. The day was navigated visually, not temporally. In Rome, buildings had learned this over centuries. Walls were thick enough to delay heat. Openings were positioned to accept light without surrendering shade entirely. The city did not try to eliminate darkness. It distributed it. This distribution organized behavior more effectively than any schedule could. When a space became uncomfortable, people left it. When it became inviting, they returned. Light also carried authority. It revealed dust, wear, and imperfection. Some tasks waited for brightness because they required inspection. Others preferred shadow because precision depended on focus rather than visibility. Craft followed these preferences naturally. A cobbler worked where light fell evenly. A scribe chose a place where glare would not exhaust the eyes. No one argued with the sun. They negotiated with it. In Baghdad, light moved through layered spaces. Courtyards admitted it indirectly. Screens filtered it. Fabric softened its edges. The city understood that direct light was not always beneficial. Diffusion mattered. Work and rest adjusted accordingly. Midday brightness pressed people inward. Late afternoon light invited them back out. Shadow was not absence, it was relief. In shaded spaces, conversation lengthened. Reading became possible without strain. People gathered where light was sufficient but not aggressive. The city learned to recognize when light encouraged activity and when it discouraged it. And it responded without instruction. As the day progressed, light lost its dominance. Evening did not arrive suddenly, it thinned. Colors dulled. Contrast softened. The city responded by lowering volume. Movement slowed. Tasks that depended on fine detail concluded. Others took their place. This transition did not require announcement. Everyone could see it happening. In Alexandria, light was inseparable from water. Reflection complicated everything. The harbor amplified brightness during the day and prolonged visibility into evening. Sailors read the water as much as the sky. When light flattened, it signaled a change in conditions. Work adjusted. Alexandria did not treat sunset as closure. It treated it as modification. Certain tasks ended, others became safer. Heat receded. Air moved differently. Light no longer exposed every surface. This allowed some kinds of work to proceed without distraction. The city understood that darkness could be useful if respected. Artificial light existed, but it did not compete with daylight. Lamps did not attempt to replace the sun. They selected. They created islands of visibility surrounded by shadow. These islands defined activity. When oil burned low, the island shrank. When it went out, activity relocated or ended. Light enforced limits gently. People learned to read these limits early. Children noticed when lamps were lit. They understood what that meant for behavior. Voices lowered, movement narrowed, play adapted. The transition from day to night was not enforced through rules. It was absorbed through observation. Light shaped social behavior as well. In bright spaces, performance increased. People displayed goods. They negotiated. They watched each other. In shadow, performance softened. Conversation turned inward. Trust relied less on visibility and more on familiarity. The city offered both at different times without conflict. There is a quiet irony here. Modern systems treat light as something to be maximized. Brightness equals productivity. In 900, excessive light was a problem to be managed. Glare exhausted, heat discouraged. The goal was not maximum illumination but usable light. This distinction preserved energy and attention. Light also shaped memory. Events that occurred in strong light were remembered differently than those in dim spaces. The city accepted this. Not everything needed to be remembered sharply. Some things could remain indistinct. Shadow protected privacy without requiring secrecy. As evening deepened, light withdrew from public spaces first. Inner rooms followed later. This created a natural sequence of retreat. People did not leave all at once. They migrated gradually. The city thinned without stress. Night did not erase the day. It rebalanced it. Shadows expanded. Lamps answered selectively. The rhythm of light guided this process with patience. There was no race against darkness. Darkness arrived as expected. Work that required light respected these boundaries. It concluded when conditions no longer supported quality. Work that tolerated shadow continued. This prevented overextension. No one forced a task past its useful window. The environment made refusal reasonable. Light also regulated attention. In dim conditions, focus narrowed. People did one thing at a time. Distraction lost its appeal. This improved care. Night work benefited from this narrowing, but it did not need to be explained. It was felt. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is how little artificial intervention was required. No schedules, no alarms, no constant adjustment. Light and shadow provided enough structure. People trusted their senses. The city trusted them in return. When morning returned, it did so unevenly. Some streets brightened early, others remained cool and dim. Activity followed these patterns. The city woke gradually, not uniformly. This staggered beginning reduced congestion and stress. It also reduced conflict. No one competed for the same moment. Light shaped the day without demanding obedience. It offered conditions. People responded. This relationship was collaborative rather than coercive. The city did not fight the sun. It arranged itself around it. In the year 900, light and shadow did the work that clocks would later attempt to do. They did it quietly, without accusation, without precision, and without anxiety. The day took its shape from where light fell and where it did not, and that shape was enough. Travel did not begin with departure times. It began with readiness. A body felt capable. An animal stood calmly. Weather offered permission. Distance was not something to be conquered quickly. It was something to be entered with patience, measured not by hours past, but by how long strength could be maintained without resentment. In the year 900, movement in Rome, Baghdad, and Alexandria followed this logic quietly. People did not ask how long a journey would take. They asked how it would feel. They prepared according to endurance rather than schedule, packing food and water for bodies rather than promises. Roads were known intimately, not abstractly. A traveler understood a path through memory of strain and relief, where the ground softened, where shade appeared, where water could be trusted. Distance was remembered in sensations. The hill that slowed breathing, the stretch that burned calves, the place where one always stopped. Maps existed, but bodies were the primary measure. In Rome, remnants of old roads still guided movement. They were no longer instruments of speed or dominance. They had aged into pathways of continuity. Travel along them did not feel urgent. One moved until it was sensible to stop. Inns and resting places were not scheduled checkpoints. They were refuges encountered when endurance suggested negotiation. Animals set the rhythm as much as humans did. A mule did not respect ambition. It respected load and terrain. When it slowed, the journey slowed. This was not inefficiency. It was collaboration. Travel succeeded because it accepted limits early rather than confronting them late. Baghdad's surrounding routes extended through environments that demanded attention. Heat, dust, and distance reshaped expectation. Movement early in the day conserved water. Movement later conserved strength. Travelers planned loosely. They knew when to begin and when to pause, not because of hours, but because of condition. Caravans moved with collective endurance. No single pace dominated. The slowest animal determined progress. This was not frustration, it was safety. Splitting pace endangered everyone. Agreement emerged naturally. Travel became a shared patience rather than an individual test. At night, travel did not always stop, but it changed character. Darkness narrowed attention, sounds carried differently, steps became deliberate. Night travel favored familiarity. Unknown paths waited for daylight. Known routes accepted cautious movement. Endurance included alertness, not just stamina. In Alexandria, water reshaped distance. Coastal movement depended on wind and current. Sailors did not calculate arrival times. They observed behavior. A sail held steady, a current eased. A boat moved when conditions allowed. Distance over water was measured by fatigue and opportunity, not by clocks. Sea travel respected rest in cycles. Work intensified when wind cooperated. Rest followed when it did not. No one forced progress against resistance for long. Resistance wasted energy. Acceptance conserved it. Across all three regions, stopping was not failure. It was strategy. Travelers stopped when conversation thinned, when muscles tightened, when attention dulled. These signals mattered more than any promise of speed. Arriving intact was more valuable than arriving early. Waiting did not imply lost time. Waiting preserved capacity. A delayed journey often ended better than a rushed one. This understanding was deeply practical. People who ignored it did not travel longer. They traveled less. There is a quiet irony here. Modern travel celebrates speed and efficiency, but endurance builds familiarity. When movement is slow enough to notice, the landscape becomes known rather than crossed. Landmarks are not markers of progress. They are companions along the way. Paths taught patience through repetition. A traveler learned where progress always slowed and where it always recovered. This knowledge was shared orally. Directions included advice about rest, not just turns. Walk until the large stone. Rest until breath returns. Continue when legs remember themselves. Endurance also shaped social encounters. Travelers met others at similar points of fatigue. Conversation began not from curiosity but from mutual relief. Stories exchanged were practical. Where water held, where shade lasted, where night felt safer. Time was discussed in terms of comfort rather than hours. The absence of schedules reduced anxiety. No one chased an appointment across distance. Arrival mattered more than punctuality. People did not apologize for delays caused by weather or exhaustion. These were not excuses. They were expected. Travel at this pace allowed adjustment. Injuries were noticed early. Animals were tended properly. Equipment failures were addressed before becoming disasters. Slow movement revealed problems while they were still manageable. This does not mean travel was easy. It was demanding, but honestly so. Difficulty was visible and predictable. There were no illusions of effortlessness. Endurance was respected as a resource, not exploited as an afterthought. Night altered travel decisions further. Darkness did not end movement automatically, but it imposed humility. One did not challenge unfamiliar terrain without light. Risk was acknowledged openly. Courage was not measured by speed, but by judgment. Shelter mattered. A place to stop was chosen for safety and comfort, not for alignment with an itinerary. Fires were built where wind allowed. Sleep happened when vigilance rotated. Travel and rest blended without conflict. Over time, this approach created resilient networks. Routes were stable because they respected limits. Communities along paths remained relevant because travelers returned regularly rather than bypassing them. Endurance preserved connection. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is how little pressure this system required. No enforcement, no deadlines, no incentives beyond survival and comfort. Travel functioned because it aligned with bodies rather than commanding them. Distance did not shrink through measurement. It became manageable through familiarity. A long journey was not a single challenge. It was a sequence of tolerable efforts separated by rest. When travelers arrived, they arrived without apology. Their bodies carried the story of the path. Dust, fatigue, calm. Arrival was not a triumph. It was completion. In the year 900, movement across land and water depended on knowing when to continue and when to stop. Endurance, not speed, made travel possible. The road did not care how fast you moved. It cared whether you could keep moving at all, and so people traveled. Slowly enough to notice, steadily enough to arrive. Measuring distance by what the body could sustain and trusting that this measure, imperfect and human, was enough. Waiting was not an empty space between actions. It was an action itself. In the year 900, people did not wait because they were forced to. They waited because waiting preserved balance. Nothing arrived instantly, and nothing was expected to. Time did not accuse those who paused. It accommodated them. In Rome, waiting appeared everywhere without announcing itself. A person leaned against a wall while a door was unlocked. A conversation lingered while someone searched for a word. A task rested unfinished because the right moment had not yet surfaced. No one checked anything to see how long this took. Duration mattered less than readiness. Waiting did not create tension because it did not imply error. No schedule had been violated, no promise had been broken. When you waited, you were simply participating in the city's rhythm. This removed the need to defend your pause. A pause needed no justification. In Rome, artisans waited for materials to behave correctly. Leather softened when it softened. Wood settled when it settled. Forcing either produced poor results. Waiting was therefore a sign of competence rather than indecision. Those who rushed were not admired. They were corrected later by failure. Public spaces absorbed waiting naturally. People stood, sat, leaned, and watched. Observation filled time without pressure. The city offered enough movement to occupy attention without demanding participation. Waiting became a way of noticing rather than a failure to act. In Baghdad, waiting carried a social quality. Courtyards collected people who were between intentions. Someone arrived early, someone arrived late. Both waited without discomfort. Conversation filled the space lightly. Silence was acceptable too. No one felt compelled to entertain the delay. Waiting here did not signal inefficiency. It signaled respect for sequence. Some things happened before others, and that order was not negotiable. A document was copied when the hand was steady. A decision was made when enough thought had gathered. Hurrying these processes did not improve them. The city recognized that impatience was costly. It led to mistakes, misunderstandings, and unnecessary conflict. Waiting prevented these outcomes quietly. No one praised it openly. It did not need praise. Its results were sufficient. In Alexandria, waiting was inseparable from water. Ships waited for wind, nets waited for tide, cargo waited for space. No one blamed the sea for delay. The sea was not late, it simply moved as it did. People adjusted. Harbors made waiting visible, boats rested, ropes slackened. Men sat without speaking much, eyes stayed on water. This was not idleness. It was attention held gently. When conditions shifted, action followed immediately. Waiting prepared movement rather than replacing it. Across these cities, waiting was understood as protective. It guarded energy. It prevented regret. It allowed conditions to reveal themselves fully before commitment. This understanding was practical, not philosophical. It came from repetition, not theory. Children learned waiting early. They waited for adults to finish speaking. They waited for space to open. They waited for tools to be returned. This was not presented as discipline, it was presented as reality. Things happened when they happened. Demanding otherwise did not change that. Waiting also shaped expectations. People did not assume immediate satisfaction. Desire remained flexible. If something was unavailable, it would be available later or elsewhere. This reduced disappointment. Waiting became a neutral state rather than a negative one. There is a quiet irony here. Modern systems fear waiting because it appears unproductive. In 900, waiting preserved productivity by preventing exhaustion. A person who waited wisely worked better afterward. This connection did not require explanation. It was felt. Waiting also redistributed power. Those who controlled schedules could not dominate others through delay because delay was normal. If someone arrived late, the response was adjustment rather than accusation. Authority did not express itself through timing. It expressed itself through judgment. This reduced conflict. Many disputes never arose because impatience never had the chance to harden into offense. People assumed delay was reasonable unless proven otherwise. This assumption softened social edges. In commerce, waiting moderated desire. Buyers waited to see if interest remained. Sellers waited to see if demand justified effort. Deals concluded when both sides felt ready. There was no pressure to close before an artificial deadline. The absence of deadlines removed leverage built on fear. In governance and administration, waiting created stability. Decisions took time. This was expected. A delayed decision was not seen as avoidance. It was seen as care. Rushed decisions carried risk, and risk was respected. Waiting at night felt different than waiting by day. Darkness encouraged patience. Without visual stimulation, time felt slower. This slowness was not uncomfortable. It allowed thought to settle. Many insights arrived during waiting, not because one searched for them, but because nothing else demanded attention. Waiting also protected privacy. In dim spaces, people were less exposed. They could pause without being watched closely. This reduced performance. One did not need to appear busy to justify presence. Waiting was allowed to look like waiting. Importantly, waiting did not isolate people. It gathered them. Shared waiting created community without effort. People waiting for the same thing exchanged glances, words, or silence. These interactions were low stakes and therefore gentle. There were limits. Waiting did not excuse neglect. If something required action, it was taken. The difference lay in recognizing when action would improve conditions and when it would not. This recognition was learned through experience. Those who could not wait caused disruption. They arrived demanding resolution before readiness. They pushed processes forward prematurely. The city absorbed some of this pressure, but not all. Over time, impatience proved self-correcting. It led to outcomes that discouraged repetition. Waiting also shaped memory. Moments of waiting were remembered not as lost time, but as part of the story. A journey included rests. A negotiation included pauses. Life included spaces where nothing visible happened. These spaces mattered. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is how calm this made people. Anxiety feeds on urgency. When urgency is rare, anxiety loses fuel. Waiting without accusation calmed the nervous system of the city. People moved with less internal noise. Time did not loom as an enemy. It flowed alongside activity. Waiting did not resist it. It cooperated. This cooperation made endurance possible across long spans. In the year 900, waiting did not need to be justified or minimized. It was woven into daily life as naturally as movement. People waited because waiting worked, and so the city paused. Not in failure, not in uncertainty, but in quiet readiness. Nothing was lost by not acting immediately. Often, something was saved. Time did not live on walls. It lived under skin. It settled into muscle, breath, appetite, and fatigue. In the year 900, people did not ask what time it was. They asked themselves how they felt. The answer was usually enough. In Rome, the body was the most reliable instrument available. It signaled hunger long before markets closed. It signaled tiredness long before lamps burned out. People trusted these signals because they had learned, over years of repetition, that the body rarely lied about its own limits. When it asked for rest, rest followed. When it asked for movement, movement felt possible. Morning was not announced by a device. It arrived in the chest first. Breath deepened, limbs felt lighter. The body shifted from holding itself together to wanting to be used. This was how people knew it was time to begin again. Not because the day had started, but because the body was ready to re-enter it. In Rome, labor followed this readiness. A mason felt when arms could lift again without resentment. A potter knew when hands were steady enough to shape clay. These judgments were not vague, they were precise. In a way no clock could be. A person who ignored them paid quickly in pain or poor work. The city learned to listen. Fatigue was not treated as weakness, it was treated as information. When the body slowed, it was telling the truth about cost. Ignoring that truth did not make someone admirable, it made them unreliable. Others learned not to depend on those who pushed past their limits, without reason. In Baghdad, bodily time shaped intellectual work as well. Reading continued while eyes could focus. Writing continued while hands remained calm. Thought itself had a rhythm. When it thinned, work ended. No one believed that longer effort automatically produced better results. Mental fatigue was respected because its consequences were subtle and lasting. The body also regulated social interaction. Conversation slowed when attention wavered. Gatherings dissolved when bodies began to shift restlessly. This was not rude, it was practical. People separated before irritation appeared. This preserved relationships better than endurance for its own sake. Heat and cold spoke directly to the body, and the body adjusted behavior accordingly. In warmer hours, movement narrowed. In cooler hours, it expanded. People did not force themselves into conditions that resisted them. They adapted posture, clothing, and pace. Time in this sense was seasonal, daily, and momentary, all at once. In Alexandria, the body negotiated constantly with moisture, wind, and salt. Skin told sailors when exposure had gone too far. Muscles told them when strain risked injury. These signals mattered more than any external measure. The sea did not care about ambition. The body learned not to argue with it. Appetite was another clock. People ate when hunger made eating effective, not because a meal was scheduled. This produced irregularity that was accepted. Some days required more, some less. The body adjusted without guilt. Eating was not separated from work and rest by strict boundaries. It flowed between them. Sleep was regulated in the same way. The body indicated when rest would restore rather than merely pause. People went to sleep when that signal arrived. They woke when it faded. This created variability, but it also created adequacy. People were rarely deeply deprived because deprivation announced itself clearly. Pain played a role as well. It was not romanticized, but it was listened to. Persistent pain altered routine. Tasks were adjusted. Help was requested. The city did not expect bodies to behave identically day after day. Change was normal. Time was experienced differently, depending on condition. This created a culture that valued self-awareness. Knowing your limits was practical knowledge, not introspection. It affected when you worked, how far you traveled, and how long you stayed. Others trusted those who knew themselves. Predictability came from honesty, not from schedules. There is a quiet irony here. Modern systems often mistrust bodily signals, treating them as obstacles to productivity. In 900, productivity depended on respecting those signals. A body pushed too far stopped cooperating. A body listened to remained useful longer. Time felt longer when the body was tired, shorter when it was engaged. This subjectivity was not considered a problem. It was accepted as part of being alive. No one tried to standardize experience. Standardization would have required ignoring too much information. Children learned bodily time early. They learned when to stop playing because exhaustion arrived. They learned when to eat because hunger appeared. Adults did not constantly override these signals. They guided them gently. This taught trust rather than compliance. Even rituals aligned with bodily readiness. Prayer, rest, work, and travel followed rhythms that the body could sustain. When bodies changed, routines adapted. This flexibility prevented crisis. Life bent instead of breaking. Illness altered time dramatically. Days slowed. Activity shrank. This was expected. Sick bodies were not forced back into rhythm prematurely. Recovery was allowed to take as long as it took. Impatience with healing was understood to prolong it. The body also marked age. Young bodies recovered quickly. Older ones required more care. This difference shaped expectation. Elders were not asked to move at the same pace. Their time was respected as slower, deeper, and no less valuable. Across all three cities, bodily time created coherence without uniformity. Everyone lived inside time, but no one lived inside the same version of it. This diversity did not fragment society, it stabilized it. Each person operated at a pace they could maintain. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is how calm this made daily life. When time is felt rather than counted, there is less urgency to compete with it. One does not race against one's own body. One collaborates with it. Fatigue ended activity without drama. Hunger began it again. Breath regulated effort. Pain warned. Recovery restored. These signals required attention, but not anxiety. They were familiar companions rather than threats. Time did not have to be external to be shared. When people respected their own bodily rhythms, they were better at respecting others. This reduced conflict. It also reduced comparison. No one asked why someone else needed more rest. They assumed it was reasonable. In the year 900, time was not an abstract resource. It was an embodied experience. People knew where they were in the day because they knew how they felt inside it. This knowledge was sufficient, and so the body kept time. Quietly, reliably, without numbers, breath by breath, step by step, it marked the passing of the day and the readiness for what came next. That was enough. Authority did not always wear symbols. Sometimes it repeated itself. In the year 900, the most reliable form of order was not command or enforcement, but habit practiced long enough to feel inevitable. Routine held the city together not by demanding attention, but by removing the need for it. In Rome, routine moved through streets with the confidence of something unchallenged. The same doors opened in the same way. The same paths were chosen without discussion. The same gestures began and ended tasks. No one announced these repetitions. They simply occurred, and because they occurred yesterday, they felt trustworthy today. Routine reduced decision-making. This mattered. When every action requires choice, fatigue accumulates quickly. When actions repeat, energy is preserved for moments that truly require thought. The city benefited from this conservation. People did not debate when to begin ordinary work. They began because they always had. This freed attention for adjustment rather than initiation. Routine did not feel restrictive because it was flexible at the edges. A task might begin a little earlier or later. A route might be altered slightly. These variations did not threaten the structure because the structure was not rigid. It was familiar. Familiarity absorbs deviation without panic. In Rome, household routines stabilized public life. Meals followed patterns, cleaning followed meals, rest followed cleaning. This sequence did not require coordination beyond the household, yet when multiplied across the city, it produced predictability. Streets cleared at roughly the same moments. Noise softened in waves. Lamps appeared gradually. No central authority planned this. It emerged. In Baghdad, routine operated across social and intellectual life as well. Study followed rhythms learned through repetition. Reading, copying, discussing, and resting occurred in sequences that bodies recognized. When attention thinned, the next step arrived naturally. Routine prevented burnout without needing instruction. Markets relied on routine to maintain trust. Sellers returned to familiar places. Buyers returned to familiar faces. Even without strict hours, people knew when presence was likely. This knowledge reduced uncertainty. The market did not need surveillance. It needed continuity. Routine also governed conflict avoidance. People knew which moments were suitable for approach and which were not. Interrupting someone during certain routines was understood as improper. This understanding prevented friction. Authority was exercised not by punishment, but by expectation. In Alexandria, routine aligned with environment. Tides, winds, and light repeated patterns that people learned to anticipate. Work adjusted accordingly. Nets were mended at familiar moments. Cargo moved in known sequences. The harbor did not require schedules because it offered rhythms more persuasive than rules. Routine created a quiet hierarchy of importance. Not everything needed immediate attention. Some things waited because they always did. This waiting did not imply neglect. It implied order. By knowing what could wait, people protected what could not. Children absorbed routine before they understood it. They learned where to stand, when to speak, how to move through shared spaces. This learning occurred without formal teaching. It happened through observation. Routine educated gently, without lectures. There is a faint humor in how powerful this made the ordinary. A simple, repeated action carried more authority than a shouted instruction. When everyone expects something to happen, it rarely needs to be enforced. The city ran on expectation more than command. Routine also softened authority figures. Those who held formal power relied on routine to limit their own involvement. They did not need to intervene constantly. The city corrected itself through repetition. This reduced the visibility of power, making it less provocative. Importantly, routine did not erase individuality. People performed the same actions differently. A gesture repeated by many was still personal. This balance mattered. Routine provided structure without demanding sameness. Time passed differently within routine. Repetition compressed perception. Days felt shorter because less effort was spent, deciding what to do next. This did not make life empty, it made it manageable. Attention could settle into detail rather than direction. Routine also preserved memory. When actions repeat, they create reference points. Deviations become noticeable. This made change meaningful rather than constant. When something shifted, people noticed because there was a baseline. In moments of disruption, routine provided recovery. After illness, after travel, after loss, returning to familiar sequences restored balance. One did not need to reinvent life. One resumed it. This capacity for resumption was crucial. Routine extended into night without conflict. Evening actions followed known paths. Lamps were lit as they always had been. Doors were secured in familiar ways. Sleep arrived after familiar preparations. The night did not feel uncertain because it followed a script learned over years. There is another quiet irony here. Modern life often celebrates novelty, but novelty demands energy. In 900, energy was preserved through repetition so that novelty could be handled when it appeared. Routine created resilience. Routine also reduced comparison. When everyone follows similar patterns, competition loses relevance. No one measures themselves against an ideal schedule. They measure themselves against yesterday. Improvement becomes subtle and internal. Even authority itself relied on routine. Orders were effective because they aligned with existing patterns. Commands that contradicted habit were resisted quietly, often by delay. Routine had veto power. This kept authority grounded. The quiet authority of routine did not announce itself. It did not argue. It simply continued. Those who aligned with it moved easily. Those who fought it expended effort without reward. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is how little drama this produced. Stability emerged not from constant oversight, but from shared expectation. The city trusted itself to continue, and that trust was justified. Routine did not make life small. It made it deep. Depth comes from repetition with attention. When actions repeat, details emerge. Care improves. Relationships thicken. In the year 900, routine was not a sign of stagnation. It was a strategy for endurance. It allowed the city to function without shouting, to coordinate without clocks, and to exercise authority without force. And so routine continued, quietly, persistently, holding the city together not by demanding obedience, but by making the next step obvious. That was its authority. Time did not disappear. It simply stopped asking to be verified. In the year 900, life continued without evidence, without records, precise enough to reassure anyone looking for them later. Days passed, not because they were counted, but because they were lived. The city did not prove that time existed. It behaved as if it always had. In Rome, nothing announced that time was working. Streets opened and narrowed without instruction. Doors were unlocked because they had been unlocked yesterday. Water flowed because it always did. No one felt compelled to check whether these processes were still valid. Validity came from repetition, not confirmation. The absence of proof did not create doubt, it created confidence. When something functions consistently, it does not need to justify itself. Time embedded in habit, in light, in bodily readiness, simply happened. The city trusted this happening because it had never betrayed them. In Rome, memory did not rely on dates, it relied on familiarity. People remembered seasons by temperature, not by calendar. They remembered events by sensation, not by placement on a line. The past was not archived precisely. It was carried forward as expectation. Tomorrow would resemble today enough to be navigable. That was sufficient. In Baghdad, time existed as sequence rather than measurement. One thing followed another because that order had proven workable. Work followed rest, study followed quiet, night followed heat. No one needed to demonstrate this order repeatedly. It revealed itself daily. Proof was unnecessary because interruption was rare. When systems collapse, they require constant monitoring. When they endure, they become invisible. Baghdad's endurance lay in how little attention its timing required. The city moved smoothly because nothing demanded urgency without reason. Records existed, but they were selective. Not every day needed preservation. Only deviations mattered. When something unusual occurred, it was noted. The ordinary passed without inscription. This did not erase life. It acknowledged that most of it did not require explanation. In Alexandria, the sea offered a different lesson. Water moved without proof and yet never stopped. Tides did not announce themselves with precision. Sailors learned to read conditions rather than measurements. The absence of certainty did not paralyze action. It guided it. Time at sea was not counted. It was felt in the body and in the vessel. When wind shifted, time shifted with it. When water calmed, opportunity appeared. No one demanded verification that the moment was correct. Correctness was revealed through cooperation. Across these cities, proof was replaced by trust. Trust in routine, trust in bodies, trust in environment, trust that tomorrow would arrive without being summoned. This trust reduced the need for vigilance. Life did not feel like something that could be lost, if not watched closely. Modern imagination struggles with this idea. We assume that without measurement, nothing holds. In 900, the opposite was true. Measurement was unnecessary because holding already existed. Time did not need to be captured to be effective. Authority also changed shape here. When time does not require proof, authority does not need to enforce it. People are not threatened with lateness or delay. They are not accused of wasting something abstract. This removes a powerful tool of control. What remains is gentler and, paradoxically, more stable. Without proof, there was less performance. People did not need to demonstrate productivity constantly. They worked because work needed doing. They rested because rest restored capacity. No one tracked outcomes obsessively. The city valued adequacy over optimization. Adequacy is an unfashionable word. It does not promise growth or excellence. It promises survival. In 900, survival was not dramatic. It was continuous. The city did not aim to impress history. It aimed to persist. Time without proof also altered memory. People remembered what mattered to them personally. Shared memory existed through stories, not through records. This made memory flexible. It adapted to context. It softened over time. Not everything needed to remain sharp. Sharpness is exhausting. It demands maintenance. When memory softened, energy was preserved. The city did not carry the full weight of its past every day. It carried only what was useful. This did not produce ignorance. It produced selectivity. Knowledge circulated where it mattered. Skills were transmitted through practice rather than documentation. Children learned by watching. Apprentices learned by doing. Time taught through repetition. There is a quiet humor in how little of this would satisfy modern audit. Nothing could be proven efficiently, and yet everything worked. The city functioned, not because it could be measured, but because it could be relied upon. Reliance replaced evidence. When you rely on something, you stop questioning it constantly. You notice it only when it fails. In 900, time rarely failed. Days arrived, nights cooled. Bodies recovered. Work continued. Failure, when it occurred, was local rather than systemic. A crop failed, a journey delayed, a storm interrupted. These were not indictments of time itself. They were conditions to be addressed. Life adjusted and resumed. Without proof, there was also less fear of loss. If time is not counted, it cannot be stolen. One cannot run out of something that has no inventory. This reduced existential anxiety. People did not experience life as a diminishing resource. They experienced it as a flow. Flow does not need documentation. It needs continuity. The city protected continuity through habit and restraint. Nothing was pushed too far. Nothing was stretched beyond repair. This moderation kept systems within tolerable limits. Night played a crucial role here. Night erased evidence gently. It blurred edges. It allowed the day to release its need to be remembered precisely. When morning returned, it did so without demanding account of everything that had happened before. This erasure was not loss, it was reset. Each day began without the burden of exact comparison. Improvement happened quietly. Decline was addressed pragmatically. The city did not panic over small fluctuations. Time stopped needing proof because life stopped demanding it. People knew what came next, well enough to prepare. They knew when to stop well enough to rest. They knew when to continue well enough to persist. Nothing else was required. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is how gentle this made existence. Without constant verification, the mind rested. Without constant measurement, the body relaxed. Without constant proof, the city breathed. The city did not ask what time it was. It asked what needed doing now. When that was done, it asked what could wait. These questions did not require numbers. They required judgment. Judgment improved with use. In the year 900, time did not end. It dissolved into life. It no longer stood apart as something to be managed. It moved alongside action, inside habit, within bodies. Proof became unnecessary because presence was enough. And so, the cities continued. Quietly, repeatedly, without timestamps, without records complete enough to satisfy later curiosity. They lived, rested, worked, waited, and slept. Not because time told them to, but because life did. Time did not need to be proven to exist. It only needed to be trusted. And in trusting it, these cities endured.